Coming up on Sleep, Eat, Perform, Repeat.
When I got to the finish line, it was very, very lonely. Instead of having that self-achievement, there was nobody there to kind of pat you on the back, say, you're great, well done, look what you've achieved. And I was thinking to myself, I've nothing beyond this as far as the running is concerned. And I was directionless after that. I didn't even want to talk about the race when I come back. So I didn't see it as a self-achievement. I thought of it as being the end of something. And I didn't know what to do next. So I've since looked back on that experience, and it has happened to me again. I call it like a post-race depression. So I've just learned how to deal with it. Maybe help others not to experience the same thing. Hello, my name is John O'Regan. You can follow me on Twitter and or Instagram at johnoregan777. I also host my own podcast. It's No Finish Line. This is my episode with Sleep, Eat, Perform, Repeat.
Welcome to Sleep, Eat, Perform, Repeat with your hosts, David Clancy and Kieran Dunn. This is a podcast about high performance. What we are striving to achieve is to figure out what makes high-performing individuals tick, why they do what they do, and why they are successful. Enjoy a journey of stories, lessons, and learnings.
John O'Regan, thanks a million for coming on with us today.
We were just chatting for 1 minute before the call, and I was just saying to Con, I said, what John does is crazy. And we said it to you, and you were going to go, and I said, hold that until we're live. So we're looking at what you're doing, what you've done, and say that is crazy. But you say it's not.
No, it's not crazy. I see it as being my sport, and it's what I have a passion for. And I think the people who would class it as being crazy who are involved in it might be doing it for the wrong reasons. They're doing it as something to talk about rather than something that they have that passion for. If you look at somebody doing maybe a sport like skeleton or skydiving, mountaineering, they don't see it as crazy. It's what they do. And they're doing it for the reason that they enjoy it. It's what fires them up. It's what gets them out of bed in the morning. That's their passion. It's not just to say, look at me doing these crazy distances or these crazy races. They're not crazy.
When did you first discover that energy came from these events and that sport?
Well, I didn't come from a very sporty background. I was somebody who was a bit gammy when playing football. I just wasn't coordinated. I got involved in martial arts. And that being individual rather than team sport, I started to excel in that because there was nobody else depending on me. It was me doing something for me. And I was very much into the outdoors. I spent a lot of time hill walking, fishing. And I read about a race called the Marathon Des Sables in the Sahara Desert, 250 kilometers in the Sahara Desert. And before I'd actually read about it, I'd seen it on Eurosport. And it was something you look at as entertainment, same way as you watch Formula One racing. But I read this book, and there was a chapter in the book about the Marathon Des Sables. And it made it sound as something that anybody could do. And I just thought to myself, well, maybe my adventurous side and the fact that I'm kind of into the outdoors, I'd like exploring and seeing new places. This could be something that I would like to do. I wasn't a runner at the time. I said I was still involved in martial arts and rock climbing, mountaineering. And I then set my sights on trying to do this race, which would involve some running. And that's really what started me running, was just reading about that race. Apart from that, I had no interest in it.
And then building into that, what was the feeling after the first race? What was it that came over you? Was it exhaustion, or was it, Jesus, I really feel a sense of accomplishment with that?
Well, because I wasn't a runner, I had to train from scratch. So I bought a book on run training. There was a run plan in it. I followed the plan. I did the Dublin Marathon in 2001. So it was April 2001 I read this about the Marathon Des Sables. Did the race, and then I set my sights on doing it. So I gave myself a little over a year. Now, when I started training for it, I was educating myself at the time. I was trying to learn as much as I possibly could about the sport, about the environment I was going into. I got in touch with athletes who had completed the race, who I found weren't very informative, because when you're successful at something, you don't always do an analysis to see what went right. You just coast on to the next thing. You take the praise and the backslapping for having done it. But if you do something wrong, you start to think, I should have done this, I should have done that. And you have all these shoulda, coulda, wouldas that you can put forward to the next one. So I got in touch with people who were unsuccessful, and I asked them, what would you do differently? And that's how I started to educate myself on how to go forward. I was learning from the mistakes of others. So I spent 2 years training. I signed up for a course in Trinity College, which is a basic course on sports science. I started learning a bit about the physiology, and trained and went to the race, right at the start line, after a bit overwhelmed thinking what was ahead of me. And then 7 days later, I got to the finish line. And when I got to the finish line, it was very, very lonely. Instead of having that self-achievement, there was nobody there to kind of pat you on the back, say, you're great, well done, look what you've achieved. And I was thinking to myself, I've nothing beyond this as far as the running is concerned. I spent 2 years, everything was focused on this, everything. I planned ahead, I was analysing what I had done, I was constantly changing my training. I didn't do anything that wasn't going to add to my chances of success in completing this race. It was almost been like at the top of a funnel, big wide funnel, and gradually I was coming down to the neck of it. Like neck of it, the funnel was the start line, and I got down to the bottom, that was the finish line, and then I was just in the void, and I was directionless after that. I didn't even want to talk about the race when I come back. So I didn't see it as a self-achievement. I thought of it as being just the end of something. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't even want to talk about it. So I've since looked back on that experience, and it has happened to me again. I call it like a post-race depression. So I've just kind of learned how to deal with it and maybe help others not to experience the same thing. So no sense of achievement. It was a lonely place at the end of it.
And you've mentioned the word passion, especially with that little preamble about people maybe doing skeleton and so forth, about a sport that is just a sport you love. It's a sport you want to do. And here you are over that 2-year journey, and then that point in time when not quite, I suppose, the moment we thought it would be. How much of that process did you enjoy? Because here we are looking at somebody who went off and studied physiology, who put the preparation in, who's committed, who's consistent with training. Where does the enjoyment come into that?
I enjoyed the planning and the process of training, and seeing what was happening, seeing the results of the planning and the training leading to success along the way. And it was almost like the race was the exam, and I proved to myself that everything I did was right. I got it right. I finished that race without any blisters. I was one of the few people who had no problems with their feet. So I achieved success with that way at the end of it, that I completed the distance from being a non-runner. But because running wasn't my sport, when I got to the finish line, I just didn't know what to do next as far as the running was concerned. So I went back training in martial arts and doing the other stuff I was doing.
So when you get to that void, and I think probably a lot of people listening can maybe relate to it, we see it a little bit, especially in elite sports with the Olympics, when there's a talk of depression after achievement with medal winners, and they hit that high, and then it's exactly as you mentioned, sort of a void feeling. What are your key lessons that you give to people for how to embrace that and maybe overcome that challenge?
Well, as you mentioned with Olympians and elite athletes, they've started from an early age, and they're picked out as being high achievers. They're not trained to do anything else. All they know is their sport. And there's so many people like them, and there's a fine line between success and failure. And nobody wants to know you when you're not doing well in those kind of sports. You're not in the spotlight. So they don't know what to do next. So they don't have any other skills that are transferable. So you really have to be planning ahead. Before I got involved in running, martial arts was my sport, and I would have done quite well in that. But then with the running, things changed. I got an invite. Well, I found out about a race that was happening at the North Pole, and Mark Pollock, who you might be familiar with. After I come back from the Sahara Desert, a friend introduced Mark to me as Mark was training for a race in the Gobi Desert similar to the one that I had done. And because I was now the local expert, because there wasn't really too many people who had done the Marathon Des Sables back then, back in the early 2000s. So I gave Mark a bit of advice on training, and he did a race with his friend Nick Wolf. And after he came back, we became friends. We did a bit of training. We were training in the Phoenix Park one day, and I told him about a race I'd heard about that was going to happen at the North Pole. And we decided we were going to do that race. So we did the race at the North Pole. And then I thought to myself, very few people have been here, and the running has got me there. So that's when I started to kind of think a bit more about running as being something I was going to do. Now, if I was to step back a little bit as well, I'd also done, with the outdoors, I trained in survival techniques. If you're familiar with Ray Mears, if you're on TV, I would have known him back in the 80s. I've been back and forth to him a few times. I trained in Arctic survival up in Swedish Lapland. I was fortunate enough at the time to be at the same place where the Swedish Army do their survival training. And I was with the head of survival training for the Swedish Army. So I got to spend 2 weeks up there living off the land you had to build your own shelters, you had to fish, hunt, make forage, make your own snowshoes. And that to me was what I liked, was the adventure. Then I heard about a race in the Yukon, which is just between northern Canada, just before you get to Alaska. And the race was along the Yukon River, headed from Whitehorse, the capital of Yukon, towards Braeburn, 100 miles away. So that race again was self-sufficient, similar to the Marathon Des Sables. And I just thought that would be an opportunity to use my Arctic survival skills along with my ability to cover a long distance, like in the Marathon Des Sables. Took part in that race. That went very, very well. I said I'd also done the North Pole Marathon. And then I just thought to myself, maybe, there seems to be a lot of these type races going on, different parts of the world. And I was then trying to decide on what I would do next. And I started to look at races in extreme environments. And that was kind of giving me a reason to travel somewhere. And then I got more into the running. So I wanted to complete the most, I set myself a goal then of running an extreme marathon on each of the 7 continents. And I decided I was going to try and do it in less than 7 years. And that's what then got me over this feeling of post-race depression. I always knew what I was going to do next, but something else I didn't do. I didn't use one of these future races as a safety net for when things were going tough during an event, that I could say, well, I'll save myself. I won't endure, I won't persevere and suffer during this race because I have something else to do. So I'll just take it easy, or I'll drop out and I'll go and I'll just save myself for the next race. I always looked beyond the finish line of the race, but when I was in the race, the finish line was the only thing I thought of. Nothing else mattered.
The preparation's jumping out to me here, and that story about how going to the Yukon, but what's jumping out here is the Swedish survival training, and you're just passing it off as if it's not too a big deal. Do you have a memory or a story you'd like to share with us about that? Because maybe it's the snowshoes. What is it?
Well, the head of the Swedish Army survival skills, his name was Lars Falt, and he, big man, and we were in it's called a lavu, it's like a wigwam, a Swedish tent, and we were sitting that of an evening. We were meant to be spending the night there, so it might have been 1-2 o'clock in the morning. It doesn't get totally dark. It would be dark enough so you wouldn't you'd still be able to see by moonlight. You wouldn't need a head torch. And when we were inside at 2 o'clock in the morning, he said, if you want to experience Arctic survival, you would leave the warmth of this tent now and you go out and you would build a shelter. This is a time when you have a choice. It's easy to do something when you've no other option, when your back's to the wall, easy to do something. But when you have a choice, that's when it becomes difficult. And that's when you kind of build resilience and your kind of strength of character. So I left the tent and I went out and I dug a trench in the ground called a snow grave. And it might have taken me an hour or so. And when I finished that, I went off for a bit of a walk, lovely clear night. And I met him down by the lake. He was sitting on a fallen tree, but he spotted me and he shouted over, Irishman. And I went over to him and he took a bottle of Jameson whiskey out of his inside pocket. And the two of us sat by the lake and we were drinking Jameson whiskey before I went back to my hole in the ground, got into my sleeping bag, which was on a deer skin, lay down on some fallen branches, and I forgot to put my boots inside my sleeping bag, and they were frozen solid the next morning. So I have a photograph of that. I can send it on to you.
Holy God. Show us now. Not many people have that memory to use. You mentioned resilience, and you mentioned something that's very interesting, because when we think of people who are resilient, we often think of them in adverse times when they have no other choice, where only one thing is to overcome. And then when they do, we say they're resilient. But it's very interesting you mentioned that when you have a choice to avoid adversity, sometimes by choosing to go through it is when you truly build it. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yes, well, I think resilience is something that can be practiced and trained. And that's where I think sport allows you to practice resilience. So it's during times when things are really, really tough, and you have the option of stopping, because there's nobody forcing you to do these things. That's when it becomes easy. When you feel you're not going to achieve what you wanted to achieve in the race. And I've seen it so many times. And I've had some really, really bad races. One in particular I can remember was the 100-kilometer World Championships over in Italy. And we were on a 10-kilometer loop. You had to do 10 times. And there would have been a water station, your own crew at a water station at 5K mark, and then the start or 10K mark. So I missed my water at one of the stops. And that had a knock-on effect because of the heat. And I was badly dehydrated. I got to the point where I was passing blood, and I was at maybe 80, 90K. I told my crew, look, I'm in a bad way here. I'm not feeling any pain, but I know I'm dehydrated. So they said, well, look, all our scores for the team are in. So whatever you do doesn't matter as far as the team is concerned. So you can stop if you want. And when he said, if you want, and I was going to think, well, I don't want, because I don't want to practice stopping. I don't want to practice giving in. You get good at what you do the most. So I thought this is the time now to practice going on. When I have an option of stopping, there's no need for me to keep going. But I thought, well, this will make it easier when I'm doing one of my 24-hour races, which go on for twice as long. So I went on to finish the race. Said everything was nearly packed up. I think the crew were hoping that I would actually stop. But like I said, you don't want to practice giving in. I've never not finished the race.
The running's brought you to some amazing places. We're only getting a semblance of it now. Marathon Des Sables, the Pole, Yukon, Sweden, Italy, and there's so much more to the story. But what else does running do for you?
Well, to me, the running would bring me to these amazing places. That's first and foremost. When I finished the last of my 7 continents, which was Australia in 2009, so within the 7 years. So over that 7 years, I've done the most northern, the most southern, the one with the highest altitude, the one with the lowest elevation. I did the hottest, the coldest. I did the most extreme ones as such on the planet at the time. Now, I'm not saying they're the toughest. They were, you decide on what's tough, not what the race director's telling you. But they were all, had some kind of a different angle to them. Then at 2009, I was in that same boat again. I was at the finish of the 7 continents. What do we do next? So I thought to myself, well, I'm out there visiting Machu Picchu, which wasn't one of the 7 wonders at the time. And I also got to visit Petra. Well, I did a race to finish the Dead Sea through the Syrian African Rift Valley. So they thought, well, there's 2 of the 7 wonders. So I set my sight on maybe running all the 7 wonders of the world. So that was the next plan. But I got talking to somebody after I came back from Australia, and they named Ian Keat, another Irish ultrarunner, and he suggested that I should try a 24-hour race. And I asked what would, because of some of the races had me on my feet for 24 hours or longer. So I asked what would be a good distance to cover in 24 hours. And he said, well, 220 kilometers would be an above average result. That would be a good standard. So I set myself, this was August, and then September, I went to London, came up with a plan to get me 220 kilometers. And I ran 220 kilometers and 21 meters, which I then found out was the best Irish debut at that distance. Now, I did exactly what I had planned to do, and that's it. I kind of set my plan, and I followed it to a T. I probably could have done more, but if I tried to do more, I might have ended up doing less. That's the way it goes. So I just stuck with the plan. And I was then selected to run for Ireland because it also happened to be the international B standard, which had me eligible for selection to run for Ireland. So that was 2009. And since then, I went on to represent Ireland in 24 hours, 100 kilometers, and ultratrail. So and then the World Masters 100K. So I've represented Ireland, I suppose, at least 10 times at those. So I moved from being somebody just going for the adventure to then becoming competitive. So it changed. My focus changed. I became a competitor. I didn't know that I was good enough to be the competitor, because I was just following and enjoying the process and doing what I like doing. So I was never forcing what was happening. I was always doing what I needed to do to achieve success. So there's no stone left unturned. I put a lot of work and effort into the preparation. And I think I mentioned martial arts. I think it's partly because I come from a martial arts background. If you were to go to your local GA team, you can volunteer as a coach. You can go to your running club and volunteer as a coach. You can't do that with martial arts. You're taught to teach. In martial arts, senior grade is an instructor. If you want to become a black belt, you have to be able to pass the skills on. That's what it is. You become an instructor. So you have to pay attention to detail. You have to learn how to pass it on. And if you want to be able to pass knowledge on, you have to have a better understanding of it yourself. Knowing the name of something is not just good enough. You have to be in depth with it. And I think that's what has helped me move forward. I've no natural talent, but my ability to plan and prepare and to, I suppose, not have notions about myself or what I'm doing. You always have to stay grounded.
I was going into that exactly, because when you become a recreational athlete, recreation jogger, into an ultra endurance athlete for Ireland and representing the country, things must change in your psyche and your ego slightly. How do you keep grounded and not get carried away with that new status for yourself?
Yeah, it is difficult. But I learned that big lesson when I come back from the Marathon Des Sables back in 2003. As I mentioned, I was becoming the local expert. And for a while, I was starting to enjoy that. And you can live off it, living off the past. But living off the past doesn't help you with the future. And when I went for my first run with Mark Pollock, I realized I was not that runner that people were telling me I was. And I found that I was letting my guard down. And when you let your guard down, if you're in a combat sport and let your guard down, that's when you're going to be humbled. So I then decided I'm never, ever going to let that happen again. The thing about fitness is you can't just hold on to it. As we said, it's use it or lose it. The human body has to be in motion. If it's one of those things that, with a machine, you keep using it, it'll break down, but the human body has to be used. You have to continuously work on fitness. Finishing a race doesn't give you a free pass to a future of health and fitness or future success. You're only as good as what you're going to do, not what you have done.
Say we're coming into your dojo this evening, okay? But not a martial arts dojo, your running preparation dojo, and you're trying to get us ready to represent the country. Where would you start with us? What are those first few weeks? What would you be looking for from Kieran and myself to gauge where we'd be in terms of our capacity to be a runner?
You have a lot to do, by the way.
For him, no, not for me too.
I also have through the martial arts, I have a background in security as well. So what I profile you, I'd have a look at you the way you're dressed, and you can tell a lot by maybe the footwear and the clothing somebody is wearing, whether they are athletic or if they are just someone who is trendy. And I would ask you for some recent performance indicators just to get an idea. I wouldn't make any assumptions. And I wouldn't want to, I suppose, be condescending. So I would let you maybe demonstrate in the way without doing too much. If I had you running on the track, I'd be talking to you as you go. I might ask you a question, and I could tell by your rate of breathing how quickly you answer me, whether you're trying to impress me or whether I'm holding you back. So I can tell a lot by that. I'd look at you as I'm watching you warming up. I would do a movement screening. Look how your legs are moving, and you can pick it up very, very quickly, because when somebody starts to move, you kind of get an idea of what their sports are. Very easy to pick out a footballer with the way one of their legs mightn't lift as high as the other, might be trailing a bit. If you were a hurler, you might see the way one arm moves relative to the other arm. So there's little things I could kind of pick up, but I would get you to do less. I always would err on the side of caution. And I would also ask you what your goals are, what you're planning on doing, because it's about the athlete, not about the coach.
I love that. And you've touched on the physical and the mental preparation and training. How much of a balance do you strike with that distribution, and what would you focus on initially?
Well, there's an overemphasis now on the mental side of things. And I think because it's a lack of understanding. So people talk about how mentally strong they are. But if you don't have the body, the physical ability to actually do what needs to be done, your mental strength will only bring you to the breaking point and bring you to injury. And, I think people are reading books by guys over in America, whatever, about, I don't want to go mentioning any names, but I can see it with a lot of young guys now, and they're talking about how strong they are, and ultrarunning seems to be a buzzword, and they're talking about how mentally strong they are, and it's 90% mental. But if you haven't got that physical side of it actually built up, it doesn't matter how mentally strong you are, you're going to just bring yourself to injury and setback after setback, and that will affect the mental side of things, because you will start to, I suppose, it will make you kind of go in on yourself. So I think you have to train the physical, and while you're training the physical, that's when you train the mental side of things. It's like we mentioned, it's the pushing through, it's the going out to train when you don't have to, there's nobody watching you, kind of keeping an eye on you. It's doing things when you don't need to do them, but it's doing the right thing at the right time. And also through experience, you should recognize the difference between the pain of an injury or the pain of improvement. The pain of improvement is just something that when you've kind of gone beyond where you've normally gone, but it's not an injury. It's a symmetrical pain whereby it's on both sides at the same time, whereby pain of an injury isolated into one area. So you got to know you stopped. Is your mental strength telling you no pain, no gain, you should push through that? That's when you're going to get a big setback. So you got to know those differences, but you need to do the physical and let that train the mental.
I think it also touches on fads of physical training as well. We see foam rollers were coming to the fore, except what really makes the difference and improves your time or gets you more scores in a hurling match is the physical capability, the basics, the fundamentals, that if you look at the best teams generally across the season, if you're going to win an All-Ireland, it's normally the most conditioned, or at least the team conditioned to a standard that is going to be there, and the other team competing is likely going to be at that standard or the same. If we're thinking for individuals at club level, at club running, if they're looking to improve themselves, and we've sort of focused on physical, what are the key attributes that you look for? Is it aerobic fitness? I know it's obviously going to be a breakdown of different sports, but what is the key basics that you would focus on for any athlete across, that might just be a recreational runner or a recreational club player in hurling or football?
Okay, but let's see, hurling or football, I think speed is very, very important, and having raw speed. So speed and power, they're relative to all sports. They're just expressed in a different way. So if you're looking at, say, speed on a football pitch, it's going to be chaotic. It's not in a straight line. It's moving in different directions. But in order to be able to do that, you have to train, I think, in a straight line, to train the technique. So you've got to learn the rules and abide by the rules before you can break the rules. So I say train yourself to become a sprinter, where you're not holding a hurl in your hand, you're not looking at a football, you're just doing raw speed development, and then get onto the pitch and do some of your sport specific drills. But so get the fundamentals, get them right. There was a time, I suppose, for some sports, maybe like hurling and football, I know with the martial arts, running was seen as a punishment. That if you were, or push-ups, if you weren't doing something right, get down and give me 20 push-ups or do 10 laps of the hall. So if you're looking at it as a punishment, you won't grow to like what you're doing or see that there is a byproduct from that punishment. That whether it's push-ups, they are making you stronger. If it's running, it's making you fitter aerobically. But in your mind, this is a punishment. This is bad. This is what I get when I do something wrong. So I have coached some football teams, and with some of the drills I was doing, I was kind of being told by the coach, well, we wouldn't normally run that long, so keep it shorter. But in order to, I think, train the aerobic engine, you have to go that little bit further, and not always. And I find people can going to go too fast when they're trying to train that. So you got to know the specifics as well of how to train the different parts of the machine. Like it's you got to. It's a system. It has to be trained as one to operate as one, but there are individual parts of it that have to be tuned in to kind of get everything working in the right way.
For those listening to this that mightn't understand the distinguishing features between that transition to ultra running, what is it? What makes you an ultra runner, and how does somebody come up with defining themselves as that?
Well, ultra running is thought of as anything further than a marathon distance. So typically it starts at 50k, but I suppose ultra runners wouldn't really see 50k as being the start point, because that's really a long training run for an ultra runner. So 100 kilometers would be really the start point, and then you have time-based races. With the difference between a time-based race and a distance-based races, let's say with the 100k, you have a set distance and you have to cover that distance in the fastest possible time. With a time-based race, you have a set time and you have to cover the most distance in that set time. And a time-based race is what we would look at as being ultra running, because that's when you have to get everything right. Your pacing, your nutrition, minimizing the amount of stoppage time you have, and also being able to, I suppose, compete against your competition, knowing when to hold back, knowing when to push forward. But typically what happens during a 24-hour race is you would see that the athletes who are at the front at the beginning will generally be at the back towards the end of it, unless there's somebody who's really experienced. And it's the athletes who can hold themselves back and not get caught up in the emotion of the race. They're the ones that will typically do well. So time-based races, and then it goes on to 48 hours, 72 hours, then they go into days, 6 days being a popular format. But 24 hours, the one I mentioned, that's the one that we have a world and European championships at. So that's recognized by the IAAF, and Athletics Ireland send teams to the 24-hour, 100k and 50k world and European championships.
So what's coming across is you're very much a student of the game, a student of ultra running and several sports. You put in a lot of preparation work. You look at the mechanics, you look at how your training can be influential towards performance. And a story about that is just in GAA, Shane Walsh, who plays for Galway, who would have been very prominent this year in the championship, he would have studied solo and techniques of past players like Tomás O'Shea. So he adopted his solo and ultimately improved performance. That was an innovation for Shane. What kind of innovations are you seeing in ultra running that exciting you, or you're even trialing yourself?
Well, I like to look outside the box and look at other sports. There's only so much you can see that's within your own area. So I look at other athletes and other sports, and I talk to them. And I was watching a TED Talk there a while back by Rodney Mullen, skateboarder. And I found it very, very interesting, because he talks about with skateboarders, they were always it was all about innovation. So you were constantly trying to come up with new tricks, new routines, but they're limited to what they can do. Their environment limits them. So that's why you see skateboarders going to car parks, and they be in city streets, and they be on using the services that is available to them. So what he would be doing is the tricks will be dependent on what they have around them. So when I'm coming up with my own kind of training ideas about chatting to somebody, I look at first of all, what event they're training for. So the event becomes the context. So that's the important part. And then the content is the specific training to get them to the event. So training has to adapt to the event that the athlete has in mind. So the Sessions as such would remain the same. Like you have tempo runs, easy runs, recovery runs, long runs, but you would have to employ that content into the context. So if you were looking at doing a track ultra, you might do a good bit of your training on the track. But if you're doing trail, we do the exact same sessions, but we will bring them into a trail environment. So that's something that I would have picked up from watching how skateboarders perform. And then if you look at the channel swimmer, it's harder for them to just stop or give up, because if it's sink or swim. And that's the same thing with ultra running and the long distances, that if you can apply that other mentality, that you don't stop because you're feeling tired, you stop when it's finished. And so I try to look at as many different sports as possible. And then if you're talking about sports psychology, most of the money there seems to be in golf and baseball. So I would read books on sports psychology related to other sports. I don't go looking for stuff on ultra running, because if you know your own game, you can apply lessons learned from somewhere else to it. Like, did you watch The Last Dance on Netflix?
Yeah.
I found it very, very interesting. A friend of mine told me to watch it. He enjoyed it. But I then told an athlete to watch it, and she came back to me saying, I watched The Last Dance. I know there's a reason you told me to watch it, but I don't know why. I was looking at it as a coach, and I was explaining, well, you've got to look at it through the lens of an athlete and see how the team is interacting and listen to what the coach is saying. So she went back and watched it again, and then it wasn't just something that was entertainment. It was something that was educational and informative. And since then, I've set in on lectures with Steve Kerr, and I've bought Phil Jackson and his some book of five rings or something like that. But and I thought that was very, very interesting. And the one thing that really stood out to me was one of the players, Dennis Rodman, was kind of getting the free pass. He could go off and do what he wanted. He was leaving him he wasn't turning for training sessions, but he still performed on the basketball court. So he still did what needed to be done. And one of his comments was, not every wild horse needs to be tamed. So that kind of showed me, okay, well, there is an individuality with every athlete and the approach. So coaching has to be athlete-centered, and it can't just be something that is generic where you apply the same thing to everybody. You can train as a group, but you're training individuals in a group.
Highly recommend you check out his other book, Sacred Hoops, which came out before it. Phil, Zen Master. John, so much in this. We're kind of written down an awful lot. What's coming up? What's exciting you? What's the next big goal on the horizon? Because you're a man of aligning with the goal.
Next, what month? July, August, I will be over in Berlin with some athletes taking part in the 100-kilometer World Championships. Then September, I'm in Italy with a team taking part in the 24-hour European Championships. That's September. Then October, I'm doing a 250-kilometer race in the Sahara Desert with a visually impaired athlete, Sinead Kane. Wow. I come back from the Sahara Desert, I think of a week. I'll come back into work for a couple of days because I don't have enough holidays. And then I fly to the Copper Canyon in Mexico. And I'm taking part in a 250-kilometer race in the Copper Canyon with the Tarahumara Indians, who some people might be familiar with from a book that came out in, I think it was the 90s, called Born to Run, which kind of kickstarted this whole barefoot running craze. So that's my next two, and don't think of anything else after that.
I think that's enough. Yeah, plenty there. Yeah, good to see you're still getting exposure to them new places and environments, and maybe the same places for you. Yeah,
based in the Sahara Desert wasn't something that was planned. I'd already signed up for the one in Morocco, and I was just asked to do the one in the Sahara, and I was just going to think, well, okay, well, I was planning on being competitive in Mexico, but the thought of actually getting into the desert again says, no, I'll just take a step back. And I look at completing the two races and just enjoying the experience and helping to get a bit of my fitness back. There back in 2018, 17, I think, I did a marathon on each of the 7 continents within 7 days with Sinead. Originally, I did the 7 continents in just under 7 years. And then I got to experience it in 6 days, 9 hours. So it was nice being able to make that comparison.
So you've given us an awful lot, plenty of insight so far. And we've one more question for you. And from your experiences, you certainly are a person we want to ask. What does high performance mean to you, John?
Now, that's a tough question, because high performance means a lot. It means different things to different people. And people kind of think high performance means having access to very fancy gym, having access to a track, having everything you need, having a team of physios and backroom staff all there to help you out. But I think high performance is the application of you being 100% in what you do, paying attention to detail, not looking at what somebody else is doing and believing, well, if I had this, if I had that. You got to be there 100%, and you got to put the work in with regard not just to training, but actually learning as much as possible about the sport that you're involved in. And when I was training for some of my races, if I didn't believe that something was going to work, or if I tried it out and I wasn't getting the results, I didn't do it anymore. This is like the way of the warrior, the samurai. If something didn't work on the battlefield, it was abandoned. They went on to do something else. They were always evolving, always improving. So to me, high performance is just using what you have when you have, not looking for excuses. You kind of result and excuse at the same time, but always look at, I suppose, getting better. One of the tips I would give to any athlete would be to keep a training diary, because what you measure and monitor will actually, those times when you're not feeling good, you can kind of look back at what you've done. Or if you have picked up an injury, you can look back and you can do a root cause analysis, try and trace it back to where the injury actually happened. And sometimes you can't find that overtraining is something that affects athletes, and keeping a diary can help that. You can be overtrained by not doing enough. You can be overtrained by doing too much. But I think for the most part, people get overtrained by not doing enough training. They just try to do all hard stuff, and they leave out the easy bits. But if you leave out the easy bits, are the kind of the stepping stones, they're the glue that joins the hard stuff together. You have to do the easy work in order to do the hard work. So high performance is, I suppose, knowing as much as you possibly can about what you're doing, and then knowing how to do it. Knowing the name of something is not enough. You have to get deep down into it and know the reasons why.
John O'Regan, thanks very much for coming on, sharing your story with us, teaching others and us, and doing a lot of wonderful things. Wishing you the very best over the next couple of months and beyond that. And again, just grateful for your time today. We really enjoyed it.
It's a while since I've been a guest on a podcast. I'm not in the same demand now as what I have been. I'd say I'm almost semi-retired. Thank you.